The woman they couldn't break. The bruises had faded, but the town's memory hadn't. When Robert Zhao threw his Chinese wife out like yesterday's bathwater, Copper Hollow expected Maylene to crawl away and disappear. They'd seen the marks on her arms, heard her silence at the mercantile, watched her flinch when doors slammed too hard. A beaten woman didn't rebuild. A foreign woman didn't fight back. But on the morning she found their savings gone and nothing left but a broken cabin and 40 acres of spite, Maylene Zhao made a choice that would crack this frontier town wide open. If you're curious to see how a woman everyone underestimated becomes the one they can't forget, stay with me until the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The door didn't even slam. Robert just left it open behind him, like the house was already dead to him, like she was. Maylene stood in the kitchen doorway and watched him load the last trunk onto the wagon. His new wife, Margaret Sullivan, the banker's daughter with skin like fresh cream and a waist Robert could probably wrap his hands around, sat perched on the seat already, parasol tilted just so. She didn't look at Maylene. Women like Margaret never did. "You'll manage," Robert said, not turning around. He was fastening the trunk straps with the same methodical precision he'd once used to count out her mistakes. 3 buttons undone on her dress, 2 minutes late with supper. 1 word spoken in Chinese when he told her to forget that language entirely. Each error had its price, usually paid in bruises hidden beneath long sleeves. "The cabin is yours," he continued, his voice flat. "The land, too. I've already signed the papers." Maylene's fingers tightened on the doorframe. Her English was good, better than he'd ever acknowledged, but she kept her mouth shut. Speaking had always been dangerous. Robert swung up onto the wagon seat beside Margaret. The horses shifted, eager. Copper Hollow's main street stretched out before them, packed dirt and scattered buildings baking under the Wyoming sun. Freedom. That's what his posture said. He was riding toward freedom, and she was the thing he was free from. "Oh," he added, almost as an afterthought. "The savings are gone. Use them for the new property Margaret and I are purchasing in Cheyenne. You understand." It wasn't a question. Then he drove away, and the dust swallowed them whole. Maylene stood there long after the wagon disappeared. The silence pressed against her ears, thick and complete. No footsteps on the floorboards to track. No voice to measure her words against. No fist to calculate distance from. The cabin sagged behind her, its roof patched with whatever scraps Robert had deemed good enough for a wife he was planning to discard. The homestead stretched out in every direction. 40 acres of stubborn earth, a fence that leaned like a drunk, a barn with more gaps than walls. It looked exactly like what it was, the minimum effort required to keep a legal claim while waiting for something better to come along. Margaret Sullivan had been that something better. Maylene walked slowly back inside. The cabin was dim, the windows too small and placed wrong to catch much light. Robert had built it that way deliberately, she thought. Easier to hide things in the dark. Easier to pretend certain sounds didn't carry. She moved through the rooms, cataloging. The bedroom held a straw mattress and a trunk with her spare dress, 1 pair of boots, 3 sets of undergarments. The kitchen had a cast-iron stove with a cracked door, a table, 2 chairs. The main room was empty except for a bench Robert had built and never bothered to finish, one end still rough cut, splinters waiting. In the bedroom trunk, beneath her spare dress, she found the empty tobacco tin where they'd kept their savings. 3 years of her teaching salary from the small Chinese community in the next township over. 2 years of selling eggs and vegetables to the few households that would buy from her. Robert's inconsistent income from ranch work, when he could get it, all gone. Maylene sat on the edge of the mattress, the tin in her hands. It was decorated with faded flowers, the kind of cheerful pattern that seemed obscene now. She'd watched her money disappear into this tin month after month, believing it was building toward something. Security. Maybe passage back to San Francisco where her cousin lived. Maybe just the comfort of knowing they could survive a bad winter. Robert had taken it all. Of course he had. The law wouldn't care. She was his wife. Legally, she'd been his property until the moment he signed those papers. And even now the distinction was murky at best. A Chinese woman claiming theft against a white man? The sheriff would laugh her right out of his office. She set the tin down carefully and stood. Her hands weren't shaking. That was something. That was new. The first year of marriage, her hands had shaken constantly. She'd been 17 when the matchmaker in San Francisco arranged it. Robert Zhao, a Chinese man who'd taken an American first name, who had a homestead claim in Wyoming, who seemed solid and respectable in his single photograph. Her parents were dead. Her uncle's family couldn't afford another mouth to feed. The matchmaker had smiled with too many teeth and said, "He'll take care of you." Robert had met her at the station in Copper Hollow, 3 days' travel from anything resembling civilization. He'd looked at her the way a man looks at a horse he's not sure was worth the price. "You're smaller than I expected," he'd said. She'd learned what he meant by that on their wedding night. The bruises had started after the first month when she'd burned the rice. Small things at first, a grip too tight on her arm, a shove that sent her stumbling. Then bigger, meaner, more deliberate. He had rules, Robert did. So many rules. Don't speak Chinese, don't waste lamp oil reading. Don't visit with the other Chinese families without permission. Don't ask questions. Don't cry where people can hear. Don't. And when she broke the rules, when she slipped and used a Cantonese word because the English one wouldn't come, when she lit the lamp to mend a shirt after dark, when she made any of the 1,000 tiny human errors that came with existing, Robert made sure she remembered. The worst part wasn't the pain. The worst part was how the town watched it happen and did nothing. Oh, they saw. People always saw. The doctor had set her broken fingers after Robert accidentally slammed the door on them. The sheriff had stopped by once when a neighbor reported screaming, took one look at Robert's calm face and Maylin's careful silence, and left. The women at the Mercantile had noticed the fingerprint bruises around her throat and suddenly found the floor fascinating. A man's marriage was his own business, after all, especially when the wife was Chinese and quiet and had nowhere else to go. Maylene walked outside. The afternoon sun hit her full force, and she lifted her face to it. Her skin had never lightened the way Robert wanted it to. Another failure. Another thing about her that embarrassed him. She looked at the land, her land now apparently, though the word felt strange. 40 acres of hard Wyoming dirt, some of it cleared, most of it still fighting back with sagebrush and rocks. A garden plot that had produced exactly 3 scrawny tomatoes last summer. A chicken coop with no chickens because a coyote had gotten them in the spring and Robert hadn't bothered to replace them. She had no savings, no livestock. A cabin that wouldn't survive a hard winter. And a town full of people who'd watched her get beaten for 3 years and decided it wasn't their concern. Maylene sat down on the front step. It was that or fall down, and she'd be damned if she'd fall. Her mother's voice came to her, soft and far away. Her mother, who'd survived the crossing from Guangdong, who'd built a life in San Francisco washing white people's clothes, who'd told stories about women warriors from the old country, women who didn't wait to be saved. "You have more than you think," her mother had said once. "You just have to decide it's yours." Maylene looked at her hands. They were scarred from cooking fires and fieldwork, calloused from gripping tools and mending fence. Rough hands, strong hands, hands that had taken 3 years of punishment and kept working. She stood up. If Robert thought leaving her with nothing would kill her, he was wrong. If the town thought she'd slink away in shame, they didn't know her at all. And if the land thought it could break her after everything else had failed, well, the land was welcome to try. She went back inside and pulled out her spare dress. It was dark blue cotton, faded from washing but intact. She laid it on the bed beside her everyday dress and took inventory of everything she owned. 2 dresses, 1 pair of boots, undergarments. A coat too thin for Wyoming winters, but all she had. A cooking pot, a pan, a kettle, 7 jars of preserved vegetables from last summer, a sack of cornmeal, half full, a small bag of salt, a knife, a hammer, a saw that needed sharpening. It wasn't much, but it was hers. The next morning, Maylene walked into town. Copper Hollow wasn't much to look at in the early light. A single main street of packed dirt, buildings that looked like they'd been thrown up in a hurry and never improved. The Mercantile, the saloon, the sheriff's office, the hotel that rented rooms by the hour and pretended not to. A church at the far end that Maylene had never entered. Robert had forbidden it, said people would stare. They stared anyway. She felt their eyes tracking her as she walked toward the schoolhouse. Mrs. Patterson, the general store owner's wife, paused in sweeping her front step. 2 ranch hands outside the saloon stopped talking. Even the dogs seemed to watch her pass. Let them look. She'd survived worse than gossip. The schoolhouse was a simple structure at the edge of town, one room with a wood stove and benches that had been carved with generations of bored children's initials. Maylene had taught there for 2 years, managing the handful of students whose parents would tolerate a Chinese teacher. It wasn't official, the town couldn't quite bring itself to actually hire her, but she showed up 3 days a week and taught reading, writing, and arithmetic to whoever came. In exchange, the families paid her what they could. Sometimes money. Sometimes food. Once, a laying hen, though Robert had wrung its neck when it stopped producing. She knocked on the doorframe. Inside, Eleanor Hutchins looked up from where she was organizing slates. Eleanor was the real teacher, a widow from Ohio who'd come west after her husband died. She had steel gray hair, sharp eyes, and a spine that didn't bend. "Maylene," Eleanor said, surprised. "I heard Robert left." News traveled fast. Of course it did. "Yes, Maylene said. "He's gone." Eleanor set down the slates and studied her. "You staying?" "Yes." "On the homestead?" "Yes." Eleanor nodded slowly. "You'll need work then. Real work, not just the scraps we've been giving you." Maylene's throat tightened. "I can teach full-time if—" "The town won't pay you full salary," Eleanor interrupted. "You know that, but I'm getting older and my eyes aren't what they were. I could use an assistant, real position, not charity. You'd handle the younger students, help with reading primers, manage the schoolroom when I need time off. I can offer you $20 a month." $20. It was half what Eleanor made, but it was steady. It was something. "I'll take it," Maylene said. "Good." Eleanor pulled out a ledger. "You start Monday? And Maylene?" She looked up, her expression softening just slightly. "I'm glad you're staying. This town needs more people who don't run." Maylene walked back through town with Eleanor's words sitting strange and warm in her chest. $20 a month wasn't enough to fix the roof or buy livestock or make the homestead anything close to profitable, but it was a start. It was proof that she could survive this. She was halfway home when she saw the smoke. Her first thought was wildfire, but the smoke was too localized, too dark. It was coming from her property. Maylene ran, her boots kicking up dust, her breath sharp in her chest. The cabin came into view, intact, thank God, but smoke was pouring from the barn. No, not smoke. Steam. She skidded to a stop. A man stood near the barn, dumping water on what looked like a small, controlled burn. He was tall, lean, in the way of men who worked hard and ate less than they should. His hat was pulled low, but she could see weathered skin, dark from sun, and hands that moved with the easy competence of someone who'd fought fire before. He looked up as she approached, and she got her first clear view of his face, older than her, maybe 40, maybe more. Lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into too many sunrises, a scar along his jaw, faded white. Dark eyes that didn't look away when they met hers. "Roof was on fire," he said, his voice rough. "Just the barn. Caught it early." Maylene stared at the barn, then at him. "How?" "Saw the smoke from the road. Figured someone ought to check." "You put it out." Seemed like the thing to do. She walked closer. The barn roof had a scorched section, but the damage was minimal. He'd used dirt and water both, smart enough to know how to smother what he couldn't drown. "Thank you," she managed. He shrugged. "You're Maylene Zhao." It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. "Heard Robert left you the place," he continued. "Heard he took the money, too." Her jaw tightened. "News travels. Always does." He dumped the last of the water and set the bucket down. "I'm Silas Reed. Worked the Morrison Ranch north of here. Was riding through when I saw the smoke. Lucky for me." "Maybe." He studied the barn critically. "This wasn't an accident. Someone said it. Used lamp oil by the smell of it." The words hit her like cold water. "Someone tried to burn my barn?" "Looks that way." "Who would—" But she stopped, because she knew. The town had watched her be beaten and done nothing. Why wouldn't they finish what Robert started? Get rid of the Chinese woman who didn't know when to leave. Silas seemed to read her thoughts. Could be kids being stupid. Could be someone with a grudge. Either way, You'll want to be careful." "Careful," she repeated. The word tasted bitter. "I can ride by tomorrow," he offered. "Check the property. Make sure nothing else is—" "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. She'd had enough of men offering things that came with hooks hidden in them. "Thank you, but no. I'll manage." Something shifted in his expression. Not offense exactly, more like understanding. "All right," he said quietly. "But if you change your mind, I'm at the Morrison place. Anyone in town can point you there." He tipped his hat and walked to his horse, a rangy sorrel gelding with patient eyes. Maylene watched him ride away, dust trailing behind him like a question mark. When he was gone, she inspected the barn herself. The scorch marks were obvious once you knew to look for them. The smell of lamp oil still hung in the air. Whoever had done this had wanted her to know it was deliberate. A warning. A threat. She found herself smiling, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. They thought fire would scare her. They thought one more cruelty would be the thing that broke her. They didn't understand that she'd been breaking for 3 years, piece by piece, and somehow she'd never quite shattered. The cracks had just made her harder to break the next time. Let them burn her barn. Let them whisper. Let them scheme. She'd survived Robert Zhao. She'd survived them too. That night, Maylene slept in the cabin with the door barred and her kitchen knife under the mattress. She didn't sleep well. Every sound brought her awake, heart pounding, hands reaching for the knife. But she slept. And in the morning, she got up and made coffee from the last of her grounds and decided what came next. The homestead needed work, real work, the kind that required muscle and knowledge she didn't have. The roof had to be patched before winter. The fence needed mending. The garden plot needed clearing and planting if she wanted food next summer. The barn needed actual repair now, not just the emergency patch job Silas Reed had managed. She could hire help, but she had no money to pay anyone. She could ask for charity, but she'd choke before she begged this town for anything. She could sell the land, but to who? And for what? Pennies on the dollar to someone who'd laugh about the desperate Chinese woman who couldn't make it alone? No, she'd figure it out herself. She spent the next week working dawn to dusk, teaching at the schoolhouse 3 days, laboring on the homestead the other 4. She patched the barn roof as best she could with scrap wood and tar paper. She cleared rocks from the garden plot until her hands bled. She mended fence with wire she salvaged from the edges of the property where Robert had dumped things he didn't want to deal with. It was brutal work, the kind that left her so tired she could barely lift her arms to wash her face before falling into bed. But it was hers. Every nail she drove, every stone she moved, every inch of fence she straightened, it all belonged to her in a way nothing ever had before. On the 8th day, Silas Reed came back. She was trying to lift a beam into place on the barn roof when she heard the horse. Her first instinct was fear. She grabbed the hammer, ready to swing it, but then she saw it was him, sitting easy in the saddle, watching her struggle with an expression that might have been amusement if it weren't so carefully neutral. "You're going to break your neck," he observed. "I'm fine," she said through gritted teeth. The beam was heavier than she'd anticipated, and the angle was wrong, but she'd be damned if she'd admit it. "Right." He dismounted and walked over. "May I?" She wanted to say no. She wanted to prove she could do this alone. But the beam was slipping, and her arms were shaking, and pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Yes," she said. He took the weight like it was nothing, positioned it with 2 efficient movements, and held it steady while she nailed it in place. They worked in silence, her pounding nails, him adjusting the angle when needed. When it was secure, he stepped back and surveyed the work with a critical eye. "You've been busy," he said. "I've been surviving." He nodded. "Roof's going to need more than that to last the winter. You've got shingles missing on the cabin too. And that fence," he gestured toward the eastern boundary, "won't hold cattle. Hell, won't hold a determined chicken." "I know," she said flatly. "You have money for materials?" "No." "Help?" "Just me." He pushed his hat back and looked at her directly. "Mind if I ask what your plan is?" "Work until it's fixed or I'm dead, whichever comes first." The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "That's not much of a plan?" "It's the one I have." Silas was quiet for a moment, studying the homestead like he was adding numbers in his head. "Morrison's got extra shingles from a job last month. He won't miss them. And I've got time on Sundays and some evenings. Could help with the heavy work?" Maylene's spine went rigid. I can't pay you. Didn't ask you to. Then why? He met her eyes. Because I've seen what happens when people decide someone doesn't deserve help. Watched my sister get turned away from 3 towns after her husband died. She had 2 kids and a failing homestead, and everyone said she should just give up, find another man, stop being stubborn. She lasted 6 months before she had to sell for nothing and move back east. He paused. I should have helped her, didn't. That was wrong. I'm not your sister. No. But maybe I'm tired of watching women get ground down by this country because the men in it can't be bothered to do the decent thing. Maylene searched his face for the trap. There was always a trap. Robert had taught her that. Men didn't help without wanting something back. Obedience, gratitude, silence, something worse. But Silas just stood there waiting, his expression open and tired and maybe a little sad. Sundays, she said finally, and evenings when you can. But I work beside you. I'm not standing around watching. Wouldn't expect anything else. And if you... She stopped, trying to find words for the boundary she needed. If you try to... I won't, he said quietly. I'm here to fix a roof, that's all. She believed him. She didn't trust him. Trust was something Robert had beaten out of her, but she believed this specific thing. For now, that would have to be enough. They shook on it, his hand rough and warm and gone again, before the contact could become uncomfortable. True to his word, Silas showed up that Sunday with shingles, nails, and a ladder. They worked the whole day, him on the high sections, her handling the lower reaches and passing up materials. He didn't talk much beyond what the work required. Hand me that tar paper. Hold this steady. Watch that nail. It's going to split. She appreciated the silence. It felt clean. By sunset, the cabin roof was halfway done. Maylene made coffee, weak, because her supply was running low, and they sat on the front step drinking it while the sky turned colors that didn't have names. You always this quiet? Silas asked. You always this helpful to strangers? Touché. He sipped his coffee, made a face. This is terrible. It's all I have. I'll bring some next time. You don't have to. It's not charity. It's self-preservation. I've had army coffee that tasted better than this. Despite herself, Maylene smiled. Just a little, just enough. They fell back into silence, but it was different now. Easier. Like maybe they'd figured out how to exist in the same space without it meaning anything complicated. Thank you, she said finally, for today. You did half the work. Still. He stood, stretched, settled his hat back on his head. I'll be back next Sunday, earlier if I can manage it. We'll get that fence fixed before snow hits. She watched him ride away into the dusk, then went inside and barred the door out of habit. But that night, she slept better than she had in years. Over the next month, Silas became a fixture on the homestead. He showed up every Sunday without fail, sometimes on Thursday evenings when the Morrison Ranch could spare him. He brought materials, shingles, nails, wire. Once a bag of seed corn he said was extra from the ranch stores. Maylene stopped arguing about it after the second week. Pride was expensive, and winter was coming. They worked in a rhythm that felt older than either of them. He'd measure and cut. She'd hold and hand off tools. They'd argue sometimes about the best way to brace a corner or patch a leak, her stubbornness meeting his practicality until they found something that worked. The cabin roof got finished. The fence got straightened, reinforced with new posts sunk deep. The barn stopped looking like it might collapse if you breathed on it wrong. Maylene found herself watching him when he didn't notice. The way he moved, efficient, no wasted motion, like a man who'd learned early that effort cost and you didn't spend it foolishly. He never stood too close, never touched her unless the work required it, and then only after asking. Need a hand up? Can I take that? Always waiting for permission. It made her chest hurt in a way she didn't have words for. You're staring, Silas said one afternoon, not looking up from the fence post he was setting. Maylene jerked her attention back to the wire she was unspooling. I wasn't. You were. It's fine. Just wondered if I had something on my face. You have dirt everywhere. Occupational hazard. He tamped earth around the post, tested its stability, nodded. This'll hold. Might not be pretty, but it'll hold. She looked at the fence line stretching across her property. It wasn't pretty. The posts were mismatched. The wire had kinks. The whole thing looked like exactly what it was, A desperate repair job done with salvaged materials and borrowed time. But it was solid. It would keep things in or out, depending on what she needed. It's good, she said. Good enough, he corrected. There's a difference. She knew that. She'd been living in the space between good and good enough her entire life. Good enough to survive. Good enough to not get hit today. Good enough to make it one more week. Good enough had been her ceiling for so long she'd forgotten what good looked like. They were packing up tools when hoofbeats sounded on the road. Maylene's shoulders tensed automatically. Still did that, probably always would. But Silas just glanced up, curious rather than concerned. Two riders came into view. One was Tom Morrison, Silas's employer, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with a beard going gray. The other was someone Maylene recognized from town, but didn't know by name. Younger, clean-shaven, wearing a vest that looked too expensive for ranch work. "Reed," Morrison called out as they approached. "Thought I'd find you here." Silas set down the post-hole digger. "Tom, something wrong at the ranch?" "Ranch is fine. Wanted to talk to you about something else." Morrison's gaze shifted to Maylene, and his expression changed. Not hostile, exactly. More like he was solving a problem he hadn't expected to find. "Mrs. Zhao, heard you were making a go of it out here." "I am," she said. The younger man dismounted. "Mrs. Zhao, I'm Daniel Garrett. I work for the land office in Cheyenne. I was hoping to speak with you about your property claim." Everything in Maylene went cold and sharp. "My claim is legal. My husband signed it over before he left." "Oh, absolutely," Garrett said quickly, too smoothly. "I'm not questioning the legality. Just wanted to discuss some options. You see, maintaining a homestead this size is difficult for anyone, let alone—" He caught himself. "Let alone a single woman. The land office has buyers interested in consolidating smaller claims into larger ranches. I could offer you a fair price, help you relocate somewhere more suitable." "I'm not selling." "Mrs. Zhao, please understand—" "She said no," Silas interrupted quietly. Garrett's smile tightened. "Mr. Reed, I appreciate your concern, but this is between myself and Mrs. Zhao. The winters here are brutal. The work is backbreaking. And frankly, there are questions about whether a woman alone can meet the improvement requirements to maintain the claim. If those requirements aren't met, the land reverts to federal control anyway. I'm simply offering her a chance to profit before that happens." "What requirements?" Maylene asked, ice in her voice. Garrett pulled out a document. "The original claim filed by your husband specified certain improvements within 5 years. Functional dwelling, cleared acreage, productive use of the land. The deadline is next spring. If those improvements aren't made, the claim is forfeit." Maylene's mind raced. Robert had filed the claim 3 years ago, which meant she had less than a year to prove the land was viable. The cabin was barely functional. She had maybe 2 acres cleared. Productive use meant crops or livestock, and she had neither. "How much land needs to be cleared?" she asked. "Minimum 10 acres under cultivation or pasture." "And the dwelling?" "Must be structurally sound, weatherproof, and demonstrate permanent residency." She looked at her cabin with its patched roof and gaps in the walls, at the barn that still listed slightly to one side, at the 2 acres of garden plot that had yielded almost nothing. Garrett mistook her silence for defeat. "You see my point. The land office is prepared to offer $200 for the entire claim. That's more than fair considering I'm Chinese and you think I'll take pennies rather than fight." The words came out harder than she'd intended, but she didn't take them back. Morrison shifted in his saddle, uncomfortable. Garrett's smile vanished entirely. "Mrs. Zhao, I'm trying to help you." "No," Silas said, his voice still quiet but carrying an edge now. "You're trying to steal her land legally. There's a difference." "This is none of your concern, Reed." "I'm making it my concern." Garrett looked between them, his expression calculating. "I see. Well, Mrs. Zhao, the offer stands until the end of the month. After that, I can't guarantee the land office will be as generous." He remounted his horse. "Think carefully. A woman alone has limited options, and this town has a long memory for people who don't know their place." He rode off. Morrison stayed behind, looking uncomfortable. "I didn't know he was going to do that," he said to Silas. "He asked me where to find you, said he had business in the area. I didn't realize." "It's fine, Tom." "It's not fine." Morrison looked at Maylene. For what it's worth, Mrs. Zhao, I think you've got more grit than half the men in this county. If you need anything, materials, advice, whatever, you let me know. Thank you, Maylene managed. After Morrison left, she and Silas stood in silence. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of orange and rust. Beautiful. Indifferent. The land didn't care who owned it. How much of that was true, she asked finally. About the improvements? All of it, most likely. Homestead claims have requirements. Robert should have met them before he left, but Silas shrugged. He probably figured it was your problem now. Can I do it? 10 acres cleared, cabin improved, livestock by spring? He was quiet for a long moment. Alone? No. With help? Maybe. I have $20 a month from teaching. That's not enough to hire anyone. I know. She turned to face him directly. Why are you doing this? Really? Your sister's dead husband is a reason, but it's not the whole reason. So what is it? Silas took off his hat, ran a hand through his hair. He looked tired. You want the truth? Always. I'm 43 years old. I've worked ranches from Texas to Montana, and I've got nothing to show for it but a saddle, a good horse, and enough money saved to maybe buy a small spread if I can find one cheap enough. I'm tired of working other men's land. Tired of being one bad season away from starting over. He met her eyes. You're fighting for something that's yours. Maybe I want to remember what that feels like. It was the most he'd said at once since she'd met him. The honesty of it sat heavy between them. If I lose the land, she said carefully, you lose the work you put into it. If I never try to build something, I've already lost. She understood that. Had been living that for the past month. Every nail driven, every stone cleared, every small victory carved out of exhausted nothing. All right, she said, we have until spring. Let's figure out what that looks like. They spent the next hour planning by lamplight in her kitchen. Silas sketched rough diagrams on scrap paper. Where to clear, how to maximize the garden plot, what repairs would count as improvements versus what was just maintenance. Maylene made notes in her careful handwriting, calculating costs, time, effort. Livestock is the problem, Silas said. Chickens are cheap, but they won't count for much. You need cattle or sheep, something that shows productive use. But cattle cost money you don't have, and sheep need fencing better than what we've got. What about pigs? He looked up. Pigs? They're cheaper than cattle. They eat anything, and they're productive, meat, breeding stock. Would that count? Might. You'd need at least 3, maybe 4 to show you're running an operation, not just keeping pets. How much would 4 pigs cost? $60, $70 if you can find someone selling. She did the math in her head. 3 months of teaching salary, assuming she spent nothing on food or materials or anything else. Impossible. I could talk to Morrison, Silas offered. He might extend credit. No. She'd been in debt before. To the matchmaker who'd arranged her marriage. To Robert, who'd held every dollar over her head like a weapon. She wouldn't do that again. There has to be another way. Like what? She thought about it, turning options over in her mind. I could take on more students, private lessons after school. You're already teaching 3 days a week and working here the other 4. When would you sleep? Sleep is optional. Maylene, I'm not taking charity and I'm not taking debt. Her voice was firm. I'll figure it out. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, but when you collapse from exhaustion, I'm not carrying you anywhere. You're heavier than you look. I am not. R2. That's the rudest thing anyone said to me all week. Week's not over yet. Despite everything, she almost laughed. Almost. The next day at school, Maylene approached Eleanor about additional work. Eleanor listened, her expression thoughtful. I can't pay you more, she said finally. The town barely tolerates paying you what they do now, but... She paused. The Hendersons have been asking about private tutoring for their daughter. She's bright but needs extra help with mathematics. And the Chen family in Silver Creek might pay for Chinese language lessons for their children. It's 2 hours each way, but they'd pay well. How much? Hendersons would probably manage $5 a month. The Chens, maybe 8 or 10. $15 more. It still wasn't enough for pigs and materials and everything else, but it was closer. I'll take both, Maylene said. It's a lot of travel, a lot of work. I'm aware. Eleanor's expression softened. You don't have to prove anything, you know, not to this town. I'm not trying to prove anything to them, Maylene said. I'm trying to survive. She started the tutoring the following week. The Henderson girl was 12, shy, and struggled with numbers in a way that had nothing to do with intelligence and everything to do with a father who yelled when she got things wrong. Maylene recognized that fear. She worked with the girl gently, patiently, showing her tricks for carrying numbers, for checking her work, for building confidence, one correct answer at a time. The trip to Silver Creek was harder. 2 hours on a borrowed horse, teaching 3 Chen children their mother's language while their father worked the silver mine, then 2 hours back. She did it every Saturday, leaving before dawn and returning after dark. The Chens paid her in silver coin, $10 exactly, and fed her lunch. It was worth it. But it cost her. She was running on 4, maybe 5 hours of sleep most nights. Teaching during the day, working the homestead in the evenings, planning and calculating and trying to stretch every dollar, every hour, every ounce of strength into something that might be enough. Silas noticed. Of course he noticed. You look like hell, he said bluntly one Sunday when she nearly fell off the barn roof because exhaustion made her clumsy. I'm fine. You're not. When's the last time you ate a full meal? She couldn't remember. Yesterday. Liar. This week. Also a liar. He climbed down from the roof and fixed her with a look. You can't work yourself to death trying to save this place. Watch me. Maylene, I don't have a choice. The words came out sharper than she intended, loud enough to echo off the barn walls. You have options. Morrison would hire you anywhere. You could save up and buy land somewhere easier, somewhere the ground doesn't fight back and the winters don't kill. But me, this is it. This is the only thing I own, the only place that's mine. If I lose it, I go back to having nothing, less than nothing. I go back to being the woman everyone expects me to be, quiet, grateful for scraps, invisible. I won't do it. I'd rather die working this land than live on my knees begging someone else for permission to exist. The silence after was complete. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Silas took off his hat, turned it in his hands. When he spoke, his voice was soft. I know what it's like to have nothing. I know what it costs to keep fighting when every smart person says quit. But dying for this land won't save it. It'll just make you dead. What do you want me to do? Give up? I want you to let people help without treating it like defeat. I am letting you help. You're letting me work. That's different. You won't take food when I bring it. Won't accept materials unless I lie and say they're extra. Won't rest even when your hands are shaking too hard to hold a hammer straight. He stepped closer, not threatening, just there, solid, real. You think accepting help makes you weak. It doesn't. It makes you smart enough to know you can't do everything alone. I've been alone before. I survived it. You endured it. There's a difference. Maylene's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to push back, to prove he was wrong. But she was so tired. Tired in her bones, tired in her soul, tired in places she didn't have names for. I don't know how to do this differently, she admitted quietly. Then learn. Same way you're learning to fix fences and patch roofs. One mistake at a time until you get it right. She looked at him, really looked. Saw the weathered face, the patient eyes, the hands that had helped her build something without asking for anything back except maybe the chance to build something himself. If I let you help more, she said slowly, what does that look like? It looks like you eating the soup I'm going to make you right now instead of pretending you're not hungry. It looks like you taking 1 day a week to rest instead of working yourself into the ground. It looks like you trusting that I'm here because I want to be, not because I'm keeping score. I don't have time to rest. You don't have time not to. You collapse. Who's going to do the work then? He had a point. She hated that he had a point. One day, she conceded, Saturday afternoons, after I get back from Silver Creek. Deal. He headed for the cabin. Now sit down before you fall down and let me see what you've got for food. What she had was half a bag of cornmeal, some salt, and 3 withered potatoes. Silas looked at the supplies with an expression that might have been dismay if he weren't so carefully neutral. This is what you've been eating? It's enough. It's not. He picked up the cornmeal, set it back down. I'm bringing supplies next time. Real supplies. Don't argue. Silas, if you collapse from hunger, I have to work twice as hard. That's not charity. That's efficiency. She wanted to argue. The words were right there, but her stomach was growling, and he was already mixing cornmeal with water, his hands moving with the easy competence of someone who'd cooked plenty of rough meals over plenty of rough fires. They ate outside as the sun set, the cornmeal cakes plain but filling. Silas had added salt and somehow made them taste better than anything she'd managed in weeks. My sister used to make these, he said quietly, when her husband was alive and things were good. She'd add honey if she had it, berries in summer. He stared at his plate. After he died, she couldn't afford honey. Couldn't afford much of anything. I sent money when I could, but it was never enough. Never fast enough. What happened to her? Sold the homestead for a fraction of what it was worth. Moved back to Ohio with the kids. Last letter I got, she was working in a textile mill. Lung disease got her 2 years ago. I'm sorry. He shrugged. She did everything right, worked hard, stayed strong, asked for help when she needed it. Still wasn't enough. Sometimes this country just grinds people down no matter what they do. Then why help me if it might not matter anyway? Because it might. He looked at her directly. And because you're still here, still fighting, that counts for something. They finished eating in silence. When he left that night, he pressed something into her hand, a small cloth bag. She opened it after he was gone and found coffee. Real coffee. Enough to last a month if she was careful. She sat on the front step and cried for the first time since Robert left. Not from sadness, from something else. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. The weeks blurred together after that, teaching, tutoring, working the land, snatching sleep in whatever gaps remained. Silas kept coming, kept bringing supplies he claimed were extra. Coffee, flour. Once, a chicken that he said had wandered onto Morrison's property and wouldn't stop causing trouble. You're supposed to get rid of troublemakers, he said, deadpan. It seemed kinder to give her to you. The chicken laid eggs. Not many, but enough. Mylin named her problem and built her a small coop from scrapwood. By October, they had 6 acres cleared. The cabin was weatherproof, the roof solid, gaps chinked with mud and moss. The barn stood straight. It still wasn't enough. They needed 4 more acres and livestock that counted. But it was progress. Then the first snow came early, and everything got harder. The snow came down thick and mean, the kind that didn't melt but piled up and turned everything silent and white and hard. Maylene woke to find 3 inches covering the ground and more falling. She stood at the window watching it accumulate and did the math in her head. The trip to Silver Creek would be impossible now. The Chen's $10 gone. The Henderson tutoring would continue, but that still left her short on the money she needed for pigs before spring. She pulled on her coat and boots and went outside anyway. The cleared acres looked smaller under snow, less like progress and more like a scar on the landscape that winter was already starting to heal over. Problem the chicken huddled in her coop, looking personally offended by the weather. Maylene scattered the last of the feed and watched the hen peck at it with indignant little jabs. I know, she said. I don't like it either. The sound of hoofbeats made her turn. Silas was riding up, his horse's breath steaming in the cold air. He had something wrapped in canvas tied behind his saddle. Road's getting bad, he said by way of greeting. Probably won't be able to get through by tomorrow. I know. He dismounted and untied the canvas bundle. Brought you some things. Don't argue. She looked at what he was carrying. Flour, salt pork, dried beans, coffee, enough to last weeks if she was careful. Silas, Morrison's closing the bunkhouse for winter. Sent everyone home except essential hands. This was going to waste. The lie was so transparent it was almost insulting, but his expression dared her to call him on it. She took the supplies without comment and carried them inside. He followed, stomping snow off his boots at the door. Cabin's holding up, he observed, looking at the roof, the walls, the stove that was actually keeping the place warm. For now. That's all we get, for now. He glanced around the small space, taking in her sparse belongings, the neatness born of having so little. There was no room for clutter. You staying warm enough at night? I'm fine. That's not what I asked. She hesitated. The truth was, the cabin held heat better than before, but the night still got cold enough that she slept in her coat, and sometimes she woke with her breath frosting in the air. But admitting that felt like admitting weakness, and she'd done enough of that lately. "I manage," she said. Silas walked to the stove, checked the wood supply stacked beside it. "You've got maybe 3 days here. I'll bring more tomorrow before the roads get worse." "You don't need to." "I know I don't need to. I'm going to anyway." He straightened, met her eyes. "You can keep fighting me on this. Or you can say thank you, and we can both get on with our day. Your choice." She wanted to fight. Every instinct Robert had beaten into her said accepting help was dangerous, that it came with prices she couldn't afford to pay. But Silas had been helping for months now, and the only thing he'd ever asked for in return was that she stop working herself to death. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded. "I'll be back tomorrow with wood. Day after, we need to talk about spring planting. Can't clear more land until the snow melts, but we can plan what goes where." After he left, Maylene put the supplies away with careful hands. The salt pork alone was worth more than she made in a week of teaching. She ran the numbers again in her head, trying to make them work. Even with the Henderson tutoring and her teaching salary, even with everything Silas was doing, she was still short 4 pigs. That's what she needed to prove productive use of the land, and she didn't have the money. She spent that evening at the table with her pencil and paper, writing figures until the lamp oil ran low. Every calculation came out the same. Not enough. Not enough. Not enough. The next morning brought more snow, and something worse. Maylene was feeding problem when she saw the rider coming up the road. She recognized him before he got close. Daniel Garrett from the land office, wrapped in a heavy coat, his horse picking its way through the drifts. Her stomach dropped. Nothing good came from visits by land office men. Garrett dismounted at her door, all false courtesy and practiced smiles. "Mrs. Zhao, forgive the intrusion. I was in the area and thought I'd check on your progress." "I'm managing." "I can see that. You've made improvements." He looked around the property with an appraising eye that made her skin crawl. "Roofs repaired, some land cleared, that's good. But I'm concerned about whether you'll meet the full requirements by spring." "I'll meet them." "Mrs. Zhao, please be realistic. You're alone out here. Winter's just starting and you're already behind on clearing. You need livestock, infrastructure, proof of productive use. The land office has standards." He paused. "My offer still stands. $200. You could take that money, start fresh somewhere more suitable for a woman in your position." "No." His smile thinned. "I'm trying to help you avoid embarrassment. If you can't meet the requirements, the land reverts to federal control. You get nothing. At least this way you'd have some compensation." I said no. "Think about it. You have until spring, but after that..." He shrugged. "Well, the law is the law. Good day, Mrs. Zhao." She watched him ride away, her hands clenched so tight her nails bit into her palms. He wasn't just checking on progress. He was counting on her to fail. Probably had buyers already lined up, waiting to snap up the land for nothing the moment it reverted. Men like Garrett made careers out of other people's desperation. She went back inside and looked at her figures again. The gap between what she had and what she needed felt like a canyon. But she'd crossed canyons before. She'd survived Robert. She'd survived being abandoned in a hostile town with nothing. She could survive this. That afternoon, she walked into town despite the snow. The Henderson house was on the east side, a neat clapboard building with smoke rising from the chimney. Mrs. Henderson answered the door, looking surprised. "Mrs. Zhao, Sarah's lesson isn't until Thursday." "I know. I wanted to ask if you knew anyone who might need tutoring or..." She swallowed her pride. "Any other work. I'm trying to raise money for livestock." Mrs. Henderson's expression softened. "Come in. It's freezing." The house was warm, comfortable, in a way that reminded Maylene of what normal people had. Furniture that matched, curtains, a rug that wasn't threadbare. Mrs. Henderson poured tea without asking and set it in front of Maylene with a plate of cookies. "I heard Garrett came to see you," she said. News really did travel instantly in small towns. "He wants me to sell," Maylene said. "He wants everyone to sell. Came by here last month trying to convince my husband to consolidate our property with the Davis Ranch. Said we'd make more money leasing than farming." She sipped her tea. "Some people took the deal. Most of us told him to go to hell, though not in those words. I don't have the option of telling him anything. If I can't prove the land is productive by spring, it's not mine anymore. Mrs. Henderson was quiet for a moment. What do you need? Money for pigs. 4 of them. Maybe $60 total if I can find someone selling cheap. That's a lot. I know. I can't give you that kind of money, but she thought for a moment. The McGregors over on Pine Ridge have pigs. They might sell you breeding stock cheap if you can work out a payment plan. And I can ask around town, see if anyone else needs tutoring or has work that needs doing. It wasn't a solution, but it was something. Maylene felt the tightness in her chest ease slightly. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet. This town can be… Mrs. Henderson paused, choosing words carefully. Difficult about certain things, but there are good people here too. People who remember what it's like to need help. Maylene left with the names of 3 families who might need tutoring and directions to the McGregor place. It was 15 miles north, too far to walk in snow, but maybe when the roads cleared. She was halfway home when she saw the smoke again. Her first thought was the barn, a repeat of that first fire. She ran, slipping in the snow, her breath sharp and painful in her lungs. But as she got closer, she realized it wasn't the barn. It was coming from near the fence line, the eastern boundary where the property met the road. Someone had built a fire, a big one, and they were using it to burn her fence posts. Maylene grabbed a bucket and ran toward it, but she was too late. 3 posts were already ash, the wire melted and useless. The fire was still burning, eating its way toward a 4th. She dumped snow on it, then more snow, smothering what she could. The flames fought back, but eventually they died down to smoking embers. She stood there breathing hard, looking at the damage. 3 posts gone. Maybe 30 feet of fence ruined. Work she and Silas had spent weeks on, destroyed in an afternoon. Footprints in the snow led away from the fire, back toward town. Multiple sets. Whoever had done this hadn't bothered to hide their tracks. Why would they? Everyone knew the sheriff didn't care what happened to the Chinese woman on the edge of town. Maylene followed the footprints with her eyes until they disappeared into the distance. Then she looked back at her ruined fence and made a decision. She would rebuild it. She would rebuild it, and she would meet every single requirement for that homestead claim. And she would stand in Daniel Garrett's face and make him watch her succeed. Because the alternative, giving up, walking away, proving everyone right about what women like her could and couldn't do, was worse than any amount of work, any amount of pain. When Silas came by the next day with the promised firewood, he saw the burned fence first thing. What happened? She told him. His expression went dark in a way she hadn't seen before, something cold and angry moving behind his eyes. You know who did it? No, but it doesn't matter. It matters. He walked to the fence line, examined the damage. This was deliberate. This was someone sending a message. I know what it was. And you're just going to let them get away with it? What else can I do? Go to the sheriff? He won't care. Confront whoever did it? I don't know who they are. And even if I did, what then? They'll just do something worse next time. She picked up a piece of charred wood, felt it crumble in her hands. I can't fight the whole town, Silas. I can only fight the land. So that's what I'm going to do. He was quiet for a long time, looking at her, at the fence, at the snow-covered property that represented everything she was trying to hold on to. All right, he said finally, then we rebuild. But this time, we do it right. Posts set deeper, wire doubled. Make it so they can't burn it down without working a lot harder. They spent the next 2 days replacing the fence. The ground was half frozen, making every post hole a battle. Maylene's hands blistered and bled, the cold making the pain sharper. Silas worked grimly, not talking much, his anger at whoever had done this leaking out in the force of his hammer strikes. On the second day, Eleanor came by. Heard about the fence? She said without preamble. Heard about Garrett too. Wanted to see if you needed anything. Maylene was too tired to lie. I need $60 for pigs and about 4 months of time I don't have. Eleanor nodded slowly. I have $20 saved. You can have it. No. It's not charity. It's a loan. You can pay me back when you're on your feet. Eleanor, I'm not asking, Maylene. I'm telling you. $20, no interest. Pay it back whenever you can. She pulled a small purse from her coat and pressed it into Maylene's hands. I've watched you work yourself half to death for months. Let someone help. Maylene looked at the money. $20. Combined with what she'd saved from tutoring, it might be enough for the pigs if she could negotiate the price down. "Thank you," she managed. "Don't thank me. Just don't die trying to prove something to people who aren't worth proving anything to." After Eleanor left, Maylene sat on the front step and cried again. Not from despair this time, but from the strange, overwhelming weight of people caring whether she lived or died. Silas found her there and sat down beside her without comment. They sat in silence as the sun set, the cold seeping through their coats, neither of them moving to go inside. "I'm scared," Maylene said finally. "Not of failing. I've failed before, but of—" She struggled to find the words. "Of trying this hard and it still not being enough. Of doing everything right and losing anyway." "I know," Silas said quietly. "Do you ever want to just quit? Find something easier? Every day?" He was quiet for a moment. "But then I think about my sister, about how she tried everything and still lost. And I think maybe the only way to honor that is to keep trying, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." "That's not very comforting." "No, but it's true." They sat there a while longer, then went inside because the cold was getting dangerous. Silas built up the fire while Maylene made coffee from the supplies he'd brought. They drank it in silence, the cabin warm around them, the wind howling outside. "I'm going to the McGregors tomorrow," she said, "to see about the pigs." "I'll come with you." "You don't have to—" "I know, I'm coming anyway." He set down his cup. "You're not doing this alone anymore, Maylene. The sooner you accept that, the easier this gets." She wanted to argue, but she was tired, and he was right, and maybe it was time to stop fighting every single offer of help like it was a threat. "All right," she said. "We go together." The ride to the McGregor place took most of the next day. The snow had stopped, but the roads were bad, forcing them to go slow. Silas had borrowed a horse for Maylene from Morrison, a gentle mare that seemed unbothered by the weather. They rode in comfortable silence, the kind that came from spending months working side by side. The McGregor ranch was bigger than Maylene had expected, well-maintained with outbuildings that looked solid, and a main house that actually had glass in all the windows. A man came out as they approached, tall, red-haired, probably 50. "Help you?" he called. "We're looking for pigs," Silas said. "Heard you might have some for sale." McGregor's eyes went to Maylene, and something in his expression shifted. Not hostile exactly, but wary. "You're the Chinese woman from Copper Hollow, the one trying to hold on to the Zhao place." "I am." "Heard Garrett's trying to push you out." "He is." McGregor nodded slowly. "Come inside. Let's talk." They followed him into the house, where his wife served coffee that was actually good and didn't taste like desperation. McGregor sat across from them at a solid oak table and got straight to the point. "I've got 6 breeding sows and a boar. I could sell you 4 sows and let you borrow the boar for breeding. Call it $60 for the sows, and you give me 1 piglet from each litter as payment for the boar's services." It was more than fair, suspiciously fair. "Why?" Maylene asked. McGregor smiled slightly. "Because Garrett came here too. Offered me money to consolidate my land with some operation out of Cheyenne. When I said no, he implied it might be difficult for me to keep my water rights. Turned out those water rights were solid, but it left a bad taste." He sipped his coffee. "I don't like men who use the law like a weapon. And I don't like seeing people pushed off land that's rightfully theirs." "I only have $40, Maylene admitted. "Then give me 40 now and 20 when you can. I trust you're good for it." She looked at Silas, who nodded slightly, then back at McGregor. "Deal," she said. They shook on it. McGregor's wife wrapped up food for them to take back, bread, cheese, some jerked beef, and wouldn't hear arguments about payment. "Just come back when the sow's farrow," she said. "I want to hear how it goes." The ride back felt different, lighter somehow, despite the cold and the long miles. Maylene had $40 less than she'd arrived with, but she had 4 pigs coming in the spring and a plan that might actually work. "We need to build a proper pen before they arrive," she said. "Something sturdy." "We will." "And I need to figure out feeding them. What they eat, how much. We'll figure it out." She looked at him. "You keep saying we." "Because it is we. Has been for a while now." That truth sat between them, complicated and simple at the same time. Somewhere in the past months, this had stopped being just about her homestead and started being about something neither of them had quite named yet. Silas, you don't have to say anything, he interrupted quietly. I'm not asking for anything. I'm just here, helping because I want to, because you're... He paused, choosing words carefully. Because you're worth helping. Her throat tightened. Robert had never said anything like that, had never implied she was worth anything except the work she could do and the silence she could keep. Thank you, she said, and meant it for more than just the pigs. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it was the kind of silence that held understanding instead of emptiness. When they got back to the homestead, there was a wagon in front of the cabin. Maylene's whole body went tense, but Silas touched her arm. It's Tom Morrison, he said, and he's got someone with him. They rode closer. Morrison stood by his wagon with another man Maylene didn't recognize. Younger, maybe 30, with the look of someone who worked with his hands. Mrs. Zhao, Morrison called out. This is Henry Chen. He's been working my ranch, but he's looking for a foreman position. Thought he might talk to you about your property. Maylene dismounted slowly. Henry Chen stepped forward and said something in Cantonese, a greeting, an introduction. The sound of her mother tongue hit her like a physical thing after years of Robert forbidding it. She responded in kind, and Henry's face broke into a smile. Morrison tells me you're trying to prove up your homestead claim, he said, switching back to English for Silas's benefit. Says you could use an extra hand come spring. I can't pay much, Maylene said honestly. I'm not asking for much. Room, board, small wage when you can manage it. In exchange, I help you meet the requirements and learn enough to maybe file my own claim someday. He looked around the property. I'm tired of working other men's land too. Figured maybe we could help each other. Maylene looked at Morrison, who shrugged. He's a good worker, honest, and he wants to learn. Seemed like a fair trade to me. She looked at Silas, who nodded slightly. Then at Henry, who stood there waiting with the kind of hope she recognized because she carried it herself. All right, she said. You can stay in the barn until we can build something better. Spring work starts as soon as the ground thaws. Henry's smile was bright enough to light the whole frozen landscape. That night, with Henry bedded down in the barn and Morrison heading back to the ranch, Maylene and Silas stood outside looking at the property. The snow made everything clean and quiet, hiding the scars of burned fence and struggling land under a blanket of white. It's coming together, Silas said quietly. Maybe. Not maybe. It is. He turned to face her. You've got Eleanor backing you. The Hendersons. McGregor. Now, Henry, people are starting to see what I've seen all along, that you're not going anywhere. Garrett won't give up. No, but neither will you. He paused. And neither will I. She looked at him in the moonlight, at the face that had become as familiar as her own, at the man who'd shown up to put out a fire months ago and never quite left. Why? She asked again. Really, why? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft and honest and a little scared. Because somewhere in the middle of fixing your roof and mending your fences, I stopped thinking about this as just helping someone. Started thinking about it as building something. With you. And I know that's not what you signed up for. And I know you've got no reason to trust that kind of thinking from a man. But I wanted you to know. That's why. Maylene's heart was hammering. Robert had never given her choice. Had never asked, just taken. But Silas stood there waiting, offering something and asking for nothing, leaving the decision entirely to her. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. Neither do I. But we figured out everything else. Maybe we can figure out this too. She thought about it, about months of working beside him, about gentle hands and patient teaching and help that never came with hidden prices, about the way he looked at her, not like a possession or a problem, but like a person worth knowing. Maybe, she said finally, but slow. I need slow. Slow is good. Slow works. They stood there in the snow with possibility hanging between them like frost in the air. Fragile and real and worth protecting. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Maylene let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this could work. Winter broke slowly, reluctantly, the snow melting into mud that made everything harder before it got easier. By March, the ground was soft enough to work, and Maylene woke each morning to the sound of Henry already moving in the barn, ready to start before the sun was fully up. He worked like a man trying to prove something, which Maylene understood because she'd been doing the same thing for months. They cleared the remaining 4 acres together, Henry swinging an axe with the kind of rhythm that came from years of hard labor, Maylene grubbing out roots and rocks until her back screamed. Silas came when he could, which was most evenings now that Morrison's ranch was ramping up for spring. The 3 of them worked in a pattern that felt almost easy. Henry on the heavy work, Silas on anything that required carpentry or planning, Maylene managing everything else and keeping the accounts that showed they were still short on almost everything that mattered. The pigs arrived in early April, 4 stout sows with mean little eyes and appetites that shocked her. McGregor delivered them himself, helped them build a proper pen reinforced with stone and heavy timber, then stood back and surveyed their work with a critical eye. "They'll do," he said. "Get them bred soon as you can. You'll want piglets on the ground before summer if you're trying to prove productive use." "We're bringing the boar next week," Maylene said. "Good. And Mrs. Zhao?" He paused. "I heard Garrett's been asking questions in town about your improvements, your finances, whether you're meeting requirements. He's building a case." Her stomach dropped. "A case for what?" "For claiming you failed to meet the homestead obligations. He can't just take your land, but if he can prove to the land office that you haven't fulfilled the terms, they can revoke the claim." McGregor's expression was grim. "You need everything documented. Dates, measurements, proof of continuous residence and improvement. And you need witnesses who'll testify you've met every requirement." "Where am I supposed to find witnesses? Half the town won't even look at me. The other half will. Eleanor Hutchins, the Hendersons, me, if it comes to that. Morrison, too, I'd wager." He tipped his hat. "Just make sure everything's in order. Men like Garrett are good at finding loopholes." After he left, Maylene sat at her kitchen table and went through every scrap of paper she had. Receipts for materials. Notes on planting dates. Eleanor's loan agreement carefully written and signed. The deed Robert had signed over, transferring the property to her name. She organized everything into a folder, her hand shaking slightly. It looked so thin, so insufficient. Proof of months of backbreaking work reduced to a handful of documents that might not mean anything if Garrett decided they didn't. Henry knocked on the doorframe. "You all right?" "Fine." "You don't look fine." She set down the papers. "Garrett's trying to find a way to take the land. McGregor thinks he's building a legal case." Henry was quiet for a moment. "My father lost his laundry business that way. Man claimed he hadn't paid taxes, produced documents that were forged, got the sheriff to back him up. By the time my father proved the documents were fake, the business was already sold to someone else." He sat down across from her. "These men, they know the law better than we do. They know how to make legal theft look legitimate. So what do I do? You make sure every single thing is documented and witnessed. You make it so clean that even a corrupt land office can't find a way in." He pulled the papers toward him, started reading through them. "We need to add more. Measurements of cleared land, inventory of livestock, proof of residence, rent receipts if you were paying any, testimony from neighbors about seeing you here continuously." "I wasn't paying rent. It's my land." "Then we get testimony. Eleanor sees you every day at school. I'm living here. Silas has been coming regularly for months. That's 3 people who can swear you've been in continuous residence and making improvements." It made sense. It was smart. But the idea of dragging people into a legal fight made her chest tight. "I don't want to make this their problem," she said. "It's already their problem. They chose to help you. Let them." Henry stood. "I'm going to start measuring the cleared acres. You write down everything you've done to this property since Robert left. Every repair, every improvement, every dollar spent. Make it a record that can't be disputed." She spent the rest of the day writing. It was harder than she expected, trying to quantify months of work in words that would mean something to a land office bureaucrat. Repaired cabin roof. Materials cost $7. Labor equivalent to 40 hours. Cleared 6 acres. Removed approximately 200 tons of rock and brush. Built livestock pen. Capacity for 4 breeding sows and 1 boar. Constructed with stone foundation and timber fencing. The numbers looked small on paper. They didn't show the bleeding hands, the exhaustion, the nights she'd fallen into bed too tired to undress. They didn't show Silas patiently teaching her how to set a post so it wouldn't shift, Or Henry working himself sick to prove he deserved the chance she was giving him, or Eleanor slipping her extra food when she thought Maylene wasn't looking. But they were what the law would recognize, so she wrote them down. Silas arrived that evening and found her still at the table, papers spread everywhere, her handwriting getting progressively worse as fatigue set in. "You look terrible," he observed. "Thank you. That's exactly what I needed to hear." He picked up one of the pages, read it, set it down. "This is good. Thorough. It's not enough. It's what you have. That makes it enough." He pulled up a chair. "McGregor came by Morrison's today. Told Tom about Garrett sniffing around. Tom's willing to testify if you need him. So's McGregor himself." "Why would Morrison do that? He barely knows me." "Because he knows Garrett, and he knows what happens when men like that start consolidating land. Small ranchers get squeezed out. Independent operators can't compete. It's not charity, it's self-preservation." Silas leaned back. "You're not as alone as you think you are, Maylene." She wanted to believe that, but years of being alone had taught her that help was temporary, that people left, that the only person she could really count on was herself. "What if it's not enough?" she asked quietly. "What if I do everything right and Garrett still finds a way? Then we fight harder." "I'm tired of fighting." "I know." He reached across the table, stopped just short of touching her hand. "But you're good at it, and you're not doing it alone anymore." The almost touch felt more intimate than actual contact would have. Maylene looked at his hand, weathered and scarred from work, so close to hers. It would be easy to close that gap. Easy and terrifying and possibly the stupidest thing she could do when everything else was already so complicated. She pulled her hand back. Not rejection, exactly. Just not yet. Silas nodded like he understood and changed the subject to spring planting schedules and whether they should focus on corn or wheat in the newly cleared acres. 2 weeks later, Robert came back. Maylene was in the garden when she heard the wagon. She looked up and felt the ground tilt under her feet. Robert sat in the driver's seat, alone this time, looking thinner than she remembered and mean in a way that went deeper than simple anger. He'd always been cruel, but there'd been calculation to it before, control. This was different. This was desperation wearing Robert's face. She stood slowly, her hand finding the garden spade without thinking. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. Robert climbed down from the wagon and walked toward her like he owned the place, like he hadn't abandoned her here 6 months ago with nothing. "Maylene," he said, "you're looking well." She didn't respond, didn't trust her voice not to shake. "I heard you've been busy, making improvements, playing farmer." He looked around the property and something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe. He hadn't expected her to still be here, let alone thriving. "Very industrious of you." "What do you want, Robert?" "What I want is what's mine. This land. The homestead claim. I made a mistake signing it over to you. I was hasty, emotional. Margaret—" His jaw tightened. "Things didn't work out as planned. But I'm willing to be reasonable. I'll buy the claim back from you. $50. The audacity of it stole her breath. $50 for land worth 10 times that, for months of work, for everything she'd built. "No." "Maylene, be reasonable. You can't possibly think you can maintain this place alone." "I'm not alone." His eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means I have help. People who actually give a damn if I live or die." "You mean that cowboy who's been sniffing around? Reed?" Robert laughed, and it was an ugly sound. "You think he's helping out of kindness? Men like that always want something. You're just too stupid to see it. Don't talk about him." "Oh, I see. You've developed feelings." He stepped closer, and Maylene's grip on the spade tightened. "Did you forget you're still my wife? Legally, you can't just—" "You left me. You signed over the property, and you left. I didn't file for divorce, which means legally this land is still marital property, which means I have as much right to it as you do." His smile was sharp. "I've been talking to a lawyer in Cheyenne. Turns out abandonment isn't the same as dissolution of marriage. You want to keep this land? You're going to have to buy me out, or we can stay married and run it together." The thought of Robert living here again, of going back to that life, made her stomach turn. But the legal reality was sinking in like ice water. He was right. They were still married. The land was still marital property. He could claim rights to it, could force her to either buy him out or take him back. "How much?" she asked, her voice flat. For a divorce and clear title? $300. She almost laughed. I don't have $300. Then you have a problem, don't you? He looked pleased with himself, like he'd just won something. You have until the end of May. That's when the homestead requirements need to be proven. You either pay me or the land goes to me when you can't meet the obligations alone. I can meet them. Can you? Because I've been hearing things about how you're short on livestock, short on money, short on everything except stubbornness. He moved closer still, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. You were always stubborn. I tried to beat that out of you, but it never quite took. Get off my property. Our property, and I'll leave when I'm ready. His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, the old familiar grip that knew exactly how much pressure to apply before bones started to crack. You're going to lose this place, Maylene, one way or another, and when you do, you'll have nothing, again, just like you deserve. A voice cut through the air, cold and hard. Let her go. Robert turned. Silas stood near the barn, and he was holding a rifle, not pointing it, not threatening, just holding it in a way that said he knew how to use it. This is between me and my wife, Robert said. Your wife told you to leave. I'm going to help you follow that instruction. You're making a mistake, Reed. I have legal rights here. Maybe you do, but right now I'm the one with the rifle. So you're going to get back in that wagon, and you're going to leave, and we're going to discuss legalities some other time when you're not drunk and putting your hands on people. For a moment, Robert looked like he might argue. Then he saw something in Silas's face that made him reconsider. He released Maylene's wrist and stepped back. This isn't over, he said. I'll be back with the sheriff and a lawyer, and we'll see how tough you are then. He climbed into the wagon and drove off, kicking up dust like spite. Maylene stood there shaking, her wrist already starting to bruise. Silas set down the rifle and walked over slowly, carefully, like she might bolt. You all right? No. The word came out steadier than she felt. He's right, about the law. We're still married. The land is still marital property. Then we fix it. How? I don't have $300. I don't have $50. And even if I did, what's to stop him from coming back and claiming something else? He knows the law. He knows how to use it against me. Silas was quiet for a moment, thinking. There might be another way. What way? He hesitated, like he was stepping onto uncertain ground. If you were married to someone else, his claim would be void. You'd need a divorce first, but if you remarried immediately after, the property would transfer to the new marriage. Marital property of a different marriage. It took her a moment to understand what he was suggesting. When she did, she almost laughed. Are you asking me to marry you? I'm saying it's an option, a legal strategy. A legal strategy. Yes. Not because you... She stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. Silas looked at her directly. If I'm being honest, I've been thinking about asking you for a while now. Not like this. Not as a legal maneuver. But if it solves your problem and gives me what I've wanted anyway, then maybe it's not the worst idea. What you've wanted. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. You. A life here. Building something that matters. He took off his hat, turned it in his hands. But not if you're just doing it to escape Robert. Not if I'm just a convenient solution. I've seen marriages built on convenience. They don't work. Maylene's mind was racing. Marriage to Silas would solve the legal problem, would give her protection Robert couldn't touch, would secure the land in a way nothing else could. But it would also mean trusting a man again, letting someone have legal power over her again, putting herself in a position where she could be heard again. I need to think, she said. Take all the time you need. Robert said end of May. That's 6 weeks. Then you have 6 weeks. But they both knew that wasn't true. Robert would be back before then, with lawyers and legal documents and all the weapons the law gave to men and didn't give to women. That night, Maylene sat with Eleanor in the schoolhouse after the children had gone home. She told her everything about Robert's return, his demands, Silas's proposal that wasn't quite a proposal. Eleanor listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When Maylene finished, she was quiet for a long moment. What do you want? She asked finally. I want the land. I want to be left alone. I want Robert to disappear and never come back. That's not what I asked. What do you want? Not what's practical, not what solves the problem. What do you actually want? Maylene opened her mouth and found she didn't have an answer. She'd spent so long surviving, so long just trying to make it through each day, that she'd forgotten how to want things beyond basic safety. I don't know, she admitted. Then figure it out. Because marrying Silas to solve a legal problem is one thing. Marrying him because you want to build a life with him is another. And you need to know which one you're doing before you say yes. What if I can't tell the difference? Then you're not ready to get married. Eleanor's voice was gentle but firm. I know you're scared. I know Robert hurt you in ways that don't heal easy. But you can't build a future by running from the past. You have to actually want the future for itself. Maylene went home that night with Eleanor's words echoing in her head. She found Silas and Henry working late on the pig pen, reinforcing it against the coming litter. Can I talk to you? She asked Silas. Henry took the hint and made himself scarce. Silas set down his tools and followed her to the front of the cabin, where they could see the whole property spread out under the stars. I'm considering your offer, she said, but I need to know something first. If Robert wasn't a factor, if there was no legal threat, would you still want to marry me? Yes. The answer came without hesitation, and it hit her harder than she expected. Why? He was quiet for a moment, gathering words. Because you're the strongest person I've ever met. Because you fight for what's yours and don't apologize for it. Because you're smart and stubborn, and you make terrible coffee, but you're trying to learn how to make it better. Because when I think about what I want my life to look like, you're in it. He paused. And because I think maybe you want me in yours too, even if you're too scared to say it. I am scared. I know. Robert hurt me. For years. And the thing is, it wasn't always bad. Sometimes he was kind. Sometimes he made me think things would get better. That made it worse somehow because I never knew which version of him I was getting. I can't... Her voice broke. I can't do that again. I can't marry someone and spend every day waiting for the cruelty to start. Silas moved closer, still careful not to touch her. I can't promise I'll never make you angry. Can't promise I'll always say the right thing, or that we won't fight, or that life will be easy. But I can promise I will never hit you, never use my size or my strength to scare you, never make you feel small or worthless or like you don't deserve respect. His voice was steady, certain. You want guarantees? That's the only one I've got. But it's a real one. Maylene looked at him, this man who'd shown up to put out a fire 6 months ago and stayed to help her rebuild everything, who'd never asked for gratitude or obedience or silence, who'd worked beside her as an equal and offered help without making her feel weak for needing it. If I say yes, she said slowly, I need it to be real, not just a legal arrangement. I need to know we're building something that matters, not just solving a problem. It's real for me. Has been for a while. For me too, she admitted, and saying it out loud felt like stepping off a cliff. I'm terrified, but it's real. He smiled, and it transformed his whole face. So is that a yes? It's a maybe. I need to handle Robert first, get the divorce, make sure he can't touch this land. Then, she took a breath. Then yes. If you still want me after dealing with all of this mess, I'll want you after. I'll want you during. I'll want you when this is done and we're old and still arguing about fence posts. Despite everything, she laughed. It felt strange, laughing when everything was falling apart, but it also felt right. We need a plan, she said. For Robert, for the divorce, for all of it. We'll figure it out. Together? Together. They stood there in the darkness, close enough to touch but not quite touching, and made plans to fight for something that hadn't even fully begun yet, but already felt worth protecting. The next morning, Silas rode to town and came back with Tom Morrison and a man Maylene didn't recognize. Older, well-dressed, with the kind of face that had seen plenty of courtrooms. This is James Whitaker, Morrison said. He's a lawyer out of Cheyenne. I told him your situation. Whitaker sat at Maylene's kitchen table and listened to the whole story without interrupting. When she finished, he pulled out paper and started taking notes. Robert's right about one thing, he said. You're still legally married, which means he can claim interest in the property, but he held up a hand when Maylene started to protest. There are ways to handle this. First, we file for divorce on grounds of abandonment and cruelty. I'll need documentation of the abuse if you have it. I don't. He was careful. No witnesses who'd testify. The doctor set your broken fingers, Silas said quietly. That's documentation. Whitaker nodded. Medical records help. I'll subpoena them. We'll also need testimony about the abandonment, when he left, that he took marital assets, that he made no provision for your welfare. Eleanor Hutchins can testify to your condition when he left. So can others in town who saw you struggling. How long will a divorce take? Normally, 6 months to a year, but we can file for an expedited hearing based on the homestead claim deadline. If we can prove that delay would cause you material harm, loss of property specifically, a judge might fast-track it. I'm thinking 3, maybe 4 weeks. That's cutting it close, Maylene said. It is, which is why we need to file immediately and make sure every piece of documentation is perfect. He looked at Silas. Morrison tells me you're planning to marry Mrs. Zhao once the divorce is final. I am. Then we make that part of the filing. Show that she has a viable path forward, that she's not trying to defraud anyone, just secure property that's rightfully hers through legitimate means. He made more notes. I'll also file a restraining order preventing Robert from entering the property or interfering with operations until the divorce is settled. If he violates it, he can be arrested. For the first time in days, Maylene felt like she could breathe. How much will this cost? Whitaker named a figure that made her stomach drop. $200. She had maybe 30 left after buying the pigs. I can't afford that. I can, Morrison said. Consider it a loan. Pay me back when you're on your feet. Tom, I can't. You can and you will. Garrett's been trying to squeeze me out for years. Helping you means he doesn't get this land, which means his consolidation plans take a hit. Like I said before, it's not charity, it's strategy. Maylene looked at all of them, Morrison, Whitaker, Silas, men who had no reason to help her except that they'd decided her fight was worth joining. All right, she said, let's do it. Whitaker filed the papers that afternoon. 3 days later, Robert showed up with the sheriff, waving documents and demanding entry. The sheriff read Whitaker's restraining order, looked at Robert, and shrugged. Says here you can't come on the property. You got a problem with that. Take it up with Judge Harrison. This is my land. Judge says it's not until the divorce is settled. The sheriff tipped his hat to Maylene. Ma'am, you have any trouble, you let me know. Robert's face went purple with rage, but there was nothing he could do. He left, and Maylene watched him go with something that felt almost like victory. Almost, because the real fight was just beginning. The divorce hearing was set for May 20th, 5 days before the homestead claim deadline. Maylene marked the date on her calendar and tried not to think about how everything she'd built could collapse in the space of a single courtroom decision. The days between felt like counting down to an execution. She threw herself into work because it was the only thing that kept her from going mad with worry. The garden got planted. Corn, beans, squash, potatoes. Henry worked the newly cleared acres with a determination that matched her own, turning soil that had never seen a plow. The 4 sows were bred and already showing signs of pregnancy, their bellies starting to swell with the piglets that would prove productive use if everything worked out. If Silas came every day now, had stopped even pretending he was going back to Morrison's ranch at night. He slept in the barn with Henry, and the two of them worked from sunup to sundown, building, repairing, improving, making the homestead into something that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. But Robert wasn't sitting idle either. Word came through Eleanor that he'd hired his own lawyer, a man from Cheyenne with a reputation for winning cases through intimidation and technicalities. Robert was claiming that Maylene had coerced him into signing over the property, that he'd been emotionally unstable after Margaret left him, that the transfer was invalid. He was also claiming that Maylene had been unfaithful, that her relationship with Silas proved she'd been planning to leave the marriage all along. It's all lies, Eleanor said, furious. Everyone knows he left you. Everyone saw what he did to you. Everyone saw and nobody did anything, Maylene corrected quietly. Why would they testify now? Because Whitaker's going to make them. He's subpoenaing half the town. And he did. The doctor who'd set her fingers. Mrs. Patterson from the general store who'd sold her supplies on credit those first desperate weeks. The sheriff who'd come by after the screaming and done nothing. Even Daniel Garrett from the land office. Though Maylene suspected he'd be testifying for Robert, not for her. The week before the hearing, Garrett showed up at the property with a surveyor and two men Maylene didn't recognize. Silas intercepted them at the fence line. "This is official business," Garrett said. "We're here to verify the homestead improvements for the claim review. Review's not scheduled until after the divorce is settled. The land office has the right to inspect at any time. Step aside, Mr. Reed." Silas didn't move. "You have paperwork for this inspection?" Garrett pulled out a document. It looked official enough, but Maylene couldn't tell from a distance if it was legitimate or just impressive-looking nonsense. "Fine," Silas said. "You can inspect, but I'm coming with you, and everything you measure gets recorded by both parties." They spent 3 hours walking the property, the surveyor taking measurements while Garrett made notes and asked pointed questions. How many acres cleared? When? Who did the work? What materials were purchased versus salvaged? How could Maylene prove continuous residence when she was in town teaching 3 days a week? Maylene answered everything calmly, though her hands shook. She had documentation for all of it. Henry's testimony about when he'd arrived, Silas's records of materials and labor, her teaching schedule that showed she returned to the property every evening. When they got to the pig pen, Garrett's expression soured. 4 sows and a boar, that's barely subsistence farming. "It meets the requirement for productive livestock," Silas said. "And they're pregnant. By June, there'll be 25 pigs on this property. If they survive, if the sows don't have complications, if disease doesn't wipe them out." Garrett made a note. "Seems risky to base an entire claim on animals that haven't even been born yet." "The requirement is for breeding stock showing productive use," Maylene said, her voice steady. 4 bred sows meet that definition. Garrett smiled thinly. "We'll let the land office decide that." After they left, Maylene sat on the front step with her head in her hands. Silas sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "He's going to twist everything," she said. "Make it sound like I barely meet the requirements, that it's all questionable." "Let him try. We have documents. We have witnesses. We have the land itself showing what you've done." Silas was quiet for a moment. "And we have something he doesn't." "What's that?" "The truth." She wanted to believe truth mattered, but she'd seen too many courtrooms rule in favor of men who lied convincingly over women who told the truth. The night before the hearing, Maylene couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to the sounds of the homestead, the pigs snuffling in their pen, the chickens settling for the night, the wind moving through the new planted fields, sounds of a working farm, a living operation, sounds that might not be hers much longer. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep and went outside. Found Silas sitting on the front step, looking out at the darkness. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. "Nope." She sat beside him. They were quiet for a while, just existing in the same space. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Me too. What if we lose? Then we figure out what comes next. There might not be a next. Robert gets the land, I have nothing. Again." Silas turned to look at her. "You'd have me, if you still wanted me. And we'd find land somewhere else, start over. It wouldn't be this place, but it'd be ours." "I don't want to start over. I want this. I've bled for this land. It's mine." "I know." He reached over and took her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. That's not nothing." She looked at their joined hands, his rough and scarred, hers the same, hands that had built something together. "If we win," she said quietly, "if the divorce goes through and we get married, I'm not going to be easy to live with. I'm stubborn, and I have nightmares, and I don't trust easy, and sometimes I'm going to push you away even when I don't mean to." "I know. And you still want this?" "I still want this." His thumb moved gently across her knuckles. "You're worth the hard parts, Maylene. You always have been." She leaned against his shoulder, felt him shift to support her weight, and let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this could work. They rode into town before dawn, Silas and Maylene on horseback, Henry following in the wagon with all their documentation organized in careful folders. Eleanor met them at the courthouse, looking fierce in her best dress, her gray hair pinned up tight. "Whitaker's already inside," she said. "He wants to talk to you before the judge arrives." The courthouse was a stolid brick building that had seen better days. Inside, it smelled like old wood and older decisions. Whitaker sat at a table in the courtroom, papers spread everywhere. looking calm in a way that should have been reassuring but somehow made Maylene more nervous. "Mrs. Zhao, Mr. Reed," he gestured to chairs. "A few things before we start. Robert's lawyer is going to try to paint you as an adulteress who manipulated her husband into signing over valuable property. He's going to argue that your relationship with Mr. Reed invalidates any claim you have to the land." "I didn't even know Silas when Robert left," Maylene protested. "I know that. You know that. But Garrett will testify that he saw Reed at your property in the fall, which could be twisted to suggest the relationship started earlier. We counter by having Reed testify about exactly when and why he first came to the property, to put out a fire. We have witnesses who can confirm you were alone those first months. It won't be pleasant, but it'll establish timeline." "What about the homestead claim itself?" Silas asked. "That's separate but related. Robert's arguing that the property transfer was invalid, which means if he's right, the claim reverts to him. The land office would then evaluate whether he meets the requirements, not Maylene. We're arguing the transfer was legal, Maylene has met all requirements, and Robert's claims are a transparent attempt to steal property he voluntarily abandoned." "What are our chances?" Maylene asked. Whitaker was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, 50-50. Judge Harrison is fair, but he's also conservative. He doesn't like seeing established property arrangements disrupted. If Robert can make a convincing case that you coerced him or that the transfer was improper, Harrison might void it just to maintain what he sees as the proper order of things." "Proper order meaning men own property and women don't?" "More or less, yes." Whitaker's expression was grim. "But we have advantages. You've clearly improved the property. You have multiple witnesses to Robert's abandonment and abuse. And frankly, Robert's lawyer is overconfident. He thinks this is an easy win. We're going to make it hard." The courtroom filled slowly. Maylene saw familiar faces: Morrison, McGregor, the Hendersons, even some people from town she barely knew. The doctor, Mrs. Patterson. People who'd watched her struggle and apparently decided it was worth showing up to support her. Then Robert walked in with his lawyer, a sharp-faced man in an expensive suit who looked like he ate desperate homesteaders for breakfast. Robert didn't look at Maylene, kept his eyes forward, his expression carefully neutral. But she could see the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his mouth. He was worried too, she realized, maybe not as confident as he wanted to appear. Judge Harrison entered and everyone stood. He was older, maybe 60, with white hair and eyes that had probably seen every variation of human stupidity the law could produce. He sat, gestured for everyone else to do the same, and looked at the documents in front of him. "This is a petition for divorce on grounds of abandonment and cruelty, filed by Maylene Zhao against Robert Zhao. I've read the initial filings. Mr. Whitaker, you may proceed." What followed was 3 hours of testimony that felt like being flayed alive in public. Whitaker called Eleanor first, who testified about Maylene's condition when she'd started teaching, underweight, exhausted, with bruises she tried to hide. He called the doctor, who confirmed he'd set broken fingers and treated other injuries over the course of the marriage. He called Mrs. Patterson, who described Robert loading up a wagon and leaving while Maylene stood in the doorway looking like she'd already died inside. Robert's lawyer, a man named Crenshaw, cross-examined each witness with surgical precision. Was Eleanor sure the bruises came from Robert? Could the doctor definitively prove the injuries weren't accidental? Had Mrs. Patterson actually seen Robert strike Maylene, or was she just speculating? The witnesses held up, but Maylene could see how Crenshaw was building doubt, making everything seem less certain than it was. Then Crenshaw called Robert to testify. Robert took the stand looking appropriately remorseful. Yes, the marriage had been difficult. Yes, he'd left. But only because Maylene had become cold, distant, unwilling to fulfill her duties as a wife. The injuries? Accidents, all of them. Maylene was clumsy, prone to falling. He'd tried to help, but she'd pushed him away. "And the property transfer?" Crenshaw asked. "I was devastated when Margaret left me," Robert said, and he actually managed to sound broken up about it. "I wasn't thinking clearly. Maylene convinced me I owed her something, that signing over the land would make up for the difficulties in our marriage. I agreed because I felt guilty, not because it was the right decision. And now? Now I realize I was manipulated. The land is worth far more than I understood. Maylene has been receiving help from Mr. Reed," he gestured toward Silas, who I believe she was involved with even before I left. I think this was planned. A way to steal my property and replace me with another man. It was a good performance. Too good. Maylene felt the ground shifting under her feet. Then Whitaker stood for cross-examination. Mr. Zhao, you testified that you left because the marriage was difficult. Is that correct? Yes. And yet you took all the couple's savings when you left. 3 years of accumulated money. Is that also correct? Robert hesitated. I took what I'd earned. All of it? Your wife's teaching salary, her earnings from the Chen family, all of it was yours? Marital property belongs to the husband. I see. And when you signed the property transfer, did anyone force you to sign? Put a gun to your head? Threaten you in any way? No, but simple yes or no, Mr. Zhao. Were you forced to sign? No. And you've testified you weren't thinking clearly due to emotional distress. Yet you were clear-headed enough to steal your wife's savings and purchase property with another woman. Interesting contradiction. Whitaker pulled out a document. This is a property deed filed in Cheyenne 3 days after you left Copper Hollow. Shows you and Margaret Sullivan as joint owners of a commercial property. Does that refresh your memory about your mental state? Robert's face flushed. That was different. It shows you were competent enough to conduct complex financial transactions, which undermines your claim that you weren't competent to sign a property transfer. Wouldn't you agree? And regarding your claim that Mrs. Zhao was involved with Mr. Reed before you left, do you have any evidence of that? Any witnesses who saw them together while you were still in residence? No, but so you're speculating, making accusations without proof. Whitaker's voice was sharp now. Mr. Zhao, isn't it true that you abandoned your wife with no money, no support, and a failing homestead because you'd found a wealthier woman? And isn't it true that you only returned when that relationship failed and you realized the property you'd discarded was actually valuable? Crenshaw objected, but the damage was done. The courtroom had seen Robert squirm, had seen him caught in contradictions. Whitaker called Silas next. Silas testified about finding the barn on fire, about helping with repairs, about the months of work it took to bring the homestead up to standard. Crenshaw tried to make it sound suspicious, all this help for a woman he barely knew, but Silas's calm, straightforward answers made it clear. He'd helped because it was the right thing to do, and the relationship had developed slowly, honestly, after Robert was long gone. Finally, Whitaker called Maylene. She walked to the stand feeling like she was walking to her own execution. Crenshaw was going to tear her apart. She knew it. Was going to make her sound weak or conniving or both. Whitaker started with easy questions. When had Robert left? What condition was the property in? What had she done to improve it? She answered steadily, keeping her voice calm, reciting facts and figures she'd memorized. 10 acres cleared, 4 breeding sows, cabin roof repaired, barn reinforced, fence rebuilt after it was burned. Burned? Judge Harrison interrupted. Someone burned your fence. Yes, sir, in November. 3 posts destroyed. Do you know who did it? No, sir, but it happened shortly after Mr. Garrett from the land office suggested I should sell the property. Harrison's eyes narrowed. Mr. Garrett is here to testify? Yes, Your Honor, Whitaker said, about the homestead requirements. I'll want to hear about this fence burning as well. When Crenshaw stood for cross-examination, he went straight for the throat. Mrs. Zhao, you've testified that your husband was cruel, that he struck you, injured you, and yet you stayed. For 3 years. Why? I had nowhere else to go. Nowhere? You had family in San Francisco, friends in Silver Creek. You chose to stay. I had no money for passage, no way to... You were earning money teaching. You could have saved enough to leave if you'd really wanted to, unless you were content with the arrangement until you found a better option. He gestured towards Silas. A man with property prospects of his own. That's not what happened. Isn't it? You waited until your husband left, convinced him to sign over valuable property, then immediately began a relationship with another man who could help you maintain it. Sounds calculated to me. I didn't convince Robert of anything. He abandoned me. Did he? Or did you make the marriage so unbearable that he had no choice but to leave? Something in Maylene snapped. 3 years of silence, of swallowing words, of being careful. It all broke. He beat me, she said, her voice clear and hard. He broke my fingers because I burned rice. He choked me because I spoke Chinese. He kicked me so hard I couldn't walk for 3 days because I smiled at another man in the mercantile. And everyone in this town knew, and nobody did a thing because I'm Chinese and I'm a woman and he was my husband, and apparently that made it legal. She looked at Crenshaw directly. So no, I didn't make the marriage unbearable. He did. And when he left me with nothing, I decided I'd rather die fighting for something of my own than spend one more day being grateful for the privilege of being beaten. The courtroom was silent. Even Crenshaw seemed taken aback. Judge Harrison leaned forward. Mrs. Zhao, you're certain about these allegations? I am, Your Honor, and I have medical records to prove at least some of it. Harrison looked at Robert. Mr. Zhao, do you wish to respond to these accusations? Robert's face was red. She's exaggerating. I may have disciplined her occasionally, but disciplined? The word came out of Mei Lin like a bullet. Is that what you call breaking bones? You were disobedient. You never listened. Never. Enough, Harrison said sharply. Mr. Zhao, this court does not recognize a husband's right to discipline his wife through violence. If Mrs. Zhao's allegations are true, your behavior was not only cruel, but criminal. He turned to Whitaker. You have the medical records? Yes, Your Honor, and testimony from the doctor who treated the injuries. Harrison spent several minutes reviewing documents. The courtroom waited in tense silence. Finally, he looked up. I've heard enough. The divorce is granted on grounds of abandonment and cruelty. The property transfer is deemed legal and binding. Mr. Zhao, you signed the document of your own free will, as evidenced by your ability to conduct other property transactions the same week. Mrs. Zhao is granted full ownership of the homestead property. He paused. However, there remains the question of whether the homestead claim itself has been properly fulfilled. He turned to Garrett, who'd been sitting in the back looking increasingly uncomfortable. Mr. Garrett, you conducted an inspection of the property. What's your assessment? Garrett stood, smoothed his jacket. Your Honor, while Mrs. Zhao has made improvements, I have concerns about whether they meet the full requirements. The livestock situation is marginal at best. 4 pregnant sows is hardly a sustainable operation. The cleared acreage is precisely at minimum, not exceeded, and there are questions about continuous residence given her teaching obligations. Mrs. Zhao teaches 3 days a week and returns to the property each evening, Whitaker interjected. She's maintained continuous residence as required, and regarding livestock, the requirement is for breeding stock showing productive use. 4 bred sows with expected litters totaling 20-plus piglets clearly demonstrates productivity. Expected litters, Garrett emphasized. Animals that don't yet exist. Your Honor, Whitaker said, may I call a witness? Harrison nodded. Whitaker called McGregor, who testified about selling Mei Lin the sows, about their confirmed pregnancies, about the expected farrowing dates. These are proven breeding animals from good stock, he said. Barring disaster, those piglets will be born, and even if they weren't, 4 breeding sows still constitute productive livestock under the Homestead Act. Then Whitaker called Morrison, who testified about Henry Chen working the property as hired labor, about the quality of the improvements, about how the land had gone from abandoned to operational in under a year. Mr. Garrett, Harrison said, do you have evidence that Mrs. Zhao has failed to meet any specific requirement, not marginal compliance, actual failure? Garrett shifted. Not failure, Your Honor, but nothing. The law sets minimums for a reason. If she's met them, she's met them. Unless you can show actual violation, your concerns about whether it's enough are irrelevant. Harrison looked at the paperwork again. I find that Mrs. Zhao has fulfilled all homestead requirements and is entitled to full claim to the property. The land office will issue final patent within 30 days. Mei Lin felt her knees go weak. She'd won. She'd actually won. Robert stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. She doesn't deserve... Mr. Zhao, you will sit down and be silent, or I will hold you in contempt, Harrison said coldly. You abandoned your wife, took her money, and are now trying to steal land you voluntarily transferred. The only ridiculous thing in this courtroom is your audacity. He banged his gavel. We're adjourned. The courtroom erupted. Eleanor was crying. Morrison was shaking Silas's hand. Henry was grinning like sunrise. Maylene just stood there trying to remember how to breathe. Whitaker came over looking satisfied. "Congratulations, Mrs. Zhao. The property is yours, free and clear." "Thank you," she managed, "for everything." "Thank Morrison. He's the one who paid for it." Whitaker gathered his papers. "And Mrs. Zhao, what you said up there about the abuse, about fighting back, that took courage. A lot of women wouldn't have done it." After he left, Silas found her in the courthouse hallway. She was leaning against the wall, still trying to process what had just happened. "You all right?" he asked. "I don't know. Ask me tomorrow." "Fair enough." He was quiet for a moment. "That offer I made, about getting married, still stands if you're interested." She looked at him, studied his face, the patience in his eyes, the absolute absence of anything that looked like Robert's cruelty. "I'm interested," she said, "but I need some time to get used to the idea that the land is really mine, that I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and find out this was all a mistake." "Take all the time you need." "A month? A year, if that's what you need." "A month," she decided. "Give me a month to settle into this, and then—" She took a breath. "Then yes, let's build something together." His smile was the best thing she'd seen in longer than she could remember. They got married on a Saturday in June, 6 weeks after the divorce was final. It was a small ceremony at the homestead, just Eleanor and the Hendersons, Anne Morrison and McGregor and Henry. The justice of the peace came from town and performed the service under the oak tree near the cabin. Maylene wore a dress Eleanor had helped her make, simple blue cotton that didn't pretend to be anything fancy. Silas wore his best shirt and pants and looked nervous enough that it made her feel better about her own nerves. The ceremony was short. They promised to respect each other, work together, build something that mattered. No talk of obedience or ownership, just partnership. When it was done and the justice had left and everyone was eating the food they'd brought, Maylene stood with Silas looking out at the property. 10 acres planted and growing. The pig pen full of new piglets, squealing and healthy. The cabin that no longer leaked. The barn that stood straight. The fence that marked clear boundaries. "It's not perfect," she said. "No," Silas agreed, "but it's ours." "Ours," she repeated, testing the word. It felt different than she'd expected. Not confining, expanding. Like sharing the weight made it lighter instead of heavier. Henry came over with a glass of cider. "Morrison's asking if you need help with the harvest. Says he can spare a few hands in September." "Tell him yes," Maylene said, "and thank him." After Henry left, she leaned against Silas's shoulder. He put his arm around her, careful even now, always checking that it was welcome. "I'm still going to have nightmares," she said quietly. "Still going to flinch sometimes. Still going to push you away when I get scared. I know. And you're still good with this?" "I'm still good with this." She looked at the homestead, at everything they'd built and everything still to build. Thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, broken and alone and expecting to fail. Thought about the woman she was now, still scared, still scarred, but standing on land that was hers, beside a man who saw her as an equal, surrounded by people who'd chosen to help because they believed she was worth it. "I used to think survival was enough," she said, "just making it through each day. But this—" She gestured at the land, the life, the future spreading out in front of them. "This is more than survival. This is actually living." "It is," Silas agreed, "and we're just getting started." The sun was setting, painting the Wyoming sky in colors that looked like promise. The land stretched out around them, hard and beautiful, and theirs. Maylene felt Silas's arm steady around her shoulders, felt the solid ground beneath her feet, felt the future opening up like a door she'd finally earned the right to walk through. She'd survived Robert. She'd survived abandonment and poverty and a town that wanted her to fail. She'd survived everything that should have broken her, and instead of breaking, she'd built something that couldn't be taken away. The woman they'd expected to disappear had become the woman they couldn't ignore. The Chinese wife, who was supposed to be grateful for scraps, had claimed 40 acres in her own name. The victim, who should have stayed beaten, had stood up in a courtroom and made powerful men uncomfortable with the truth. And now, standing on her own land beside a man who'd proven himself through patience and labor and respect, Maylene Zhao felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. She felt free. "Come on," she said, pulling Silas toward the cabin where their friends were celebrating. We have a harvest to plan and a life to build. We should probably get started." They walked back together, and if their steps were a little lighter than before, if their smiles were a little wider, well, they'd earned that. They'd earned all of it. The homestead that had started as a prison had become a foundation. The land that was supposed to defeat her had become the proof of her strength. And the future that once looked impossible now stretched ahead, full of piglets and harvests and quiet mornings and the simple, extraordinary freedom of building something that mattered with someone who mattered. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And that was enough. That was everything.